But we are now speaking to former Energy Minister Kevin Ramnarine. And whenever he's on, he expands on this topic in certain areas that, I mean, it's just amazing. What was the profit? What could be the geopolitical backlash? What took place in the earlier years? And of course, what's going to be the future if we continue on this trajectory when it comes to the future of our energy sector? A pleasant good evening to you, sir.
Good night, Mikey. I just want to make sure that you are hearing me clearly.
Not clearly.
Not clearly. You hear me? Are you hearing me now?
A little better. Let me see.
I don't know.
All right. Let's try
You hear
that.
me now?
Go ahead. Yeah.
Yeah, you hear me clearly, Mikey?
No, you're still a bit muffled.
I don't know. Let me just... Hold on, give me 1 minute.
And these things happen when you're living in a large mansion. You may be the left wing, but the right wing may have better reception. So, it happens.
Are you hear me now?
I'm hearing you a lot better. You moved across to the right wing.
Well, good night, Mikey. And I was doing a little technological experimentation there with a headphone, but it didn't work out.
All right.
Good night, and thanks for having me on the show. A lot to discuss about Petrotrin. And the question, Mikey, is why is it that 6 years or 7 years, going on 7 years, this year will mark the 7th anniversary, why is it that this company and that decision to close the refinery remains a high national discussion point? It's not going away.
No.
And it is because that in the soul, in people's heart and minds, they know that there's a lot that is not being told to the country. And people are not clear in their mind, and people are not buying the story that was given to them by the government as a rationale for closing the company. And that is why this thing is not going to go away. So I just wanted to start off with a post, making reference to a post that was made by Mr. Stuart Young. And he made this post on Facebook on the 28th of February 2025 at 1:03 p.m. And in this post, he replies to the opposition leader, Mrs. Kamala Persad-Bissessar, and he accuses her of, he's saying, I am compelled to respond to another unfortunate attempt by Mrs. Kamala Persad-Bissessar, leader of the opposition and so on, to mislead the public with respect to the facts surrounding the financial standing of Petrotrin in 2018. And he goes on to say that she said that the company made a profit in 2018.
Yeah.
And then he went on to quote from what is called the consolidated financial statements of Petrotrin for 2018, which he says shows a loss of 16.487 billion. Now, what Mrs. Persad-Bissessar was quoting was the operating profits
Right.
from an unaudited set of accounts. And that story would have been reported at some point in time in 2018 or 2019 or thereabouts, right? Mm-hmm. What happened, and I want to deal with this issue of what he's talking about here, about the 16.487 billion loss for 2018. And he put up the page from the report, and it is page 13 of the report. And this report is the consolidated financials of Petrotrin for the year 2018. And he says, and this is not the first time he's said this. He said this in the Parliament on the 9th of October 2023. So what I want to deal with tonight is this 16, and I'll round it off to $16.5 billion loss.
All right.
So in the Parliament, I said it's not the first time he said this. He said this before. So we have the post on Facebook recently, and now we have him in the Parliament on the 9th of October 2023.
That's right.
And budget debate, and he says by 2018 the loss for the people of Trinidad and Tobago was 16 billion. Same 16 billion, right? That he put up on Facebook, page 13 of the financials, because he says the chickens had come home to roost.
That's right.
Because of mismanagement, and it is irrefutable. And he goes on to say, anyone can research and see that between 2010 and 2015, that's where he lives, He's always between 2010 and 2015, right? He said between 2010 and 2015, they drove Petrotrin into a loss-making, they meaning the opposition, the UNC, drove Petrotrin into a loss-making entity that we still carry on the books today. So let us deal with these two statements and the $16 billion, right?
Please clear that up, please.
So where does the 16 billion come from, right? The 2018, for the year 2018, now what is special about the year 2018 in the history of Petrotrin?
Right.
That's the year the company was closed down. So for 2018, the financials that Stuart Young is quoting from, what he didn't say, were prepared for a company classified as a non-going concern. A company which was discontinuing business. A company which was closing down.
Yeah, winding up
the company,
right.
Exactly.
Right.
And if you go back to his Facebook page of the 28th of February, and you look at what he posted here as Petroleum Company of Trinidad and Tobago Consolidated Statement of Profit or Loss and Other Comprehensive Income, to the top left-hand side of the page, it says discontinued operations, right? Discontinued operations could only mean one thing. And it goes on to at the bottom of the page, the same page he posted, it says, of all of the results in the current year are from discontinued operations, whereas the results of the prior year, 2017, were from continuing operations. Since the decision was taken to restructure, the decision taken to restructure was only made in the current year, 2018.
Right.
So listen to where I'm going with this. So in that that financial report for 2018 is 111 pages. But he chose to look at one figure on one page. So page 64 of that financial statement, the 2018 financial statement, says the decision to cease operations and restructure the company was considered, and it was considered an impairment trigger that required an impairment test on property, plant, and equipment, intangible assets, and goodwill. Right? So what does that mean? It means that the plant, property, and equipment of Petrotrin was distributed to its successor companies. And when that happens, as far as the value of the asset goes, the value of the asset on the balance sheet of Petrotrin went to zero. Because they have now given away their plant, property, and equipment. It's been distributed to the successor companies, Heritage, Guaracara, and Paria, right?
Right.
So the same page 64, indicates that the impairment amounted to 15.45 billion. Where did this 15.45 billion in assets go? These assets were distributed from Petrotrin to its successor companies, including Heritage. Furthermore, on page 60 of the same report, the same 111-page report, which he posted one page of, on page 60 of the same financials, it reports that the impairment attributed to the refinery alone was 12.6 billion. This is on page 60, right? So I go on to say that if you go to page 11 of the financial statements, further reveals that by the end of 2018, Petrotrin had zero long-term assets, right?
Right.
Petrotrin had zero long-term assets. That is because if you have all the long-term assets, which is plant, property, and equipment, were distributed so that the value of nothing is zero. So where did it go? They were distributed to Heritage, Paria, and Guaracara. Consequently, Petrotrin reported a total asset base of 40.6 billion in 2017, right? But by the end of 2018, the asset base of the company called Petrotrin fell to 23.7 billion. What accounts for that huge difference? And that difference is 16.9 billion. That again is because in the winding up of the company, the plant, property, and equipment of the company were distributed to the successor companies. As a result, the value of the assets of the plant, property, and equipment went to zero. And there had to be a reflection of that balance sheet activity on the profit and loss statement. So if you impair asset, that impairment is recorded on the balance sheet.
Right.
And there's a second financial statement called a profit and loss statement. And the two statements are interrelated. And there's something called double entry bookkeeping in accounting. So if you have an impairment on the one hand on the balance sheet, you have to have a matching entry on the profit and loss statement as an expense on the profit and loss statement. So the point is, right? The point is that this explains why in its final year of operation, when it transitioned from a going concern to a non-going concern, Petrotrin was reported to have lost 16.5 billion, page 13 of the financials. The 2018 loss, therefore, cited by the Minister in Parliament in October 2023 and on Facebook a few days ago, had nothing to do with the operations of the company, but it had to do with the accounting treatment of asset impairment related to the restructuring. Now, so the loss in 2018 was as a result, the loss that Minister Young is flagging in the Parliament in October 2023 and on Facebook in February 2025. That loss that he's holding up and waving like a flag in a carnival band, that loss is as a result of the closure of the company discontinuing operations, of the company becoming a non-going concern, and the auditors are saying, KPMG, that if you're distributing the assets, if you're giving away your jewelry, if you're giving away a TV and your stove and your printer and your flat screen, the value of those things on your balance sheet, if you, Mikee K, if you have a balance sheet and you decide to give away all these appliances that you have in your house, the value of those things on your balance sheet before you give them away was $20,000.
Yeah.
When you give them away on your balance sheet, you have zero. Because you give them away. You no longer own them. And that $20,000 in value that you've given away has to be now reflected on your profit and loss statement as a negative $20,000 as an expense on your profit and loss statement. So I hope that the listeners are following. It's not an easy thing to follow, but the bottom line is that the loss that Minister Young, or the 16.5 billion that he keeps talking about, is as a result of a decision that they made.
Yeah, then I need to ask this question, and I'm certain there are people on the outside who want to know. Based on what you're saying, $16.5 billion, was Petrotrin making that kind of money annually? What
I will say is that I have been gathering all the financial information on Petrotrin for the period 2007 to the period 2018. And I have a number of highly qualified people, some of whom worked in Petrotrin. They're retired now. These are chartered accountants and so on. These are people who understand accounting. And we have been looking at those numbers over that 12-year period.
All right.
Right? And we have come to several conclusions. One of which is that the current government misunderstood the financials of Petrotrin. And secondly, the current government misunderstood the integrated business model of Petrotrin, being an integrated oil company, right? And I will come to this point now because I have a friend who insists that I make this point because I think he gets very upset whenever he sees some of these numbers. If you look at the cash flow statements of Petrotrin in said financials, and I'm just saying, I said that we have all, way back to 2007, Petrotrin's operations was generating, and I say this slowly, if I become the CEO of a business tomorrow,
right,
the first question I'm going to ask my financial people, my CFO, my accountant is, are we generating sufficient cash to meet our obligations? All right? And with regard to Petrotrin, when you look at the 2018 financials, when you look at the 2017 financials, the company was in a cash positive position. What does that mean? It means that, and I'm not making this up, this is in the financials, right? The company was generating sufficient cash to meet its obligations. What are the obligations? The obligations are paying salaries, buying goods and services, paying debt. The company was servicing its debt, and so on. So the company was generating sufficient cash, and I could see PNM people listening to this and getting upset. But what really spooked the PNM and caused them to act the way they acted was the fact that the bullet payment for the bond was coming due in August 2019.
Okay.
Right? And they had 4 years to plan for that. We knew, because that bond didn't drop from the sky in 2015. It didn't drop from the sky. It didn't drop on Keith Rowley in 2015. It didn't drop on UNC and Kevin and it had a history.
Right.
That bond was taken out by Malcolm Jones in 2009.
Okay.
So we always knew since 2009 that this $850 million US, what they call it, bullet payment, was going to be due in August 2019. So the PNM had 2015, 2016, 2017, 2018. They had, let's say 4 years.
Right.
They had a little less than, I want to be honest, they had a little less than 4 years.
Right.
They had about, 46 months to plan for the coming of that bullet payment. Right. And what eventually happened to the bullet payment? It was due, right? And the bondholders, like everybody else, Mikey, if you lend somebody money, you want back your money, right? The bondholders are like, where are we money? $850 million US. So the government, the PNM government, convinced the bondholders to refinance or to roll over. Both of them are used interchangeably. And the bondholders agreed to roll over. And one of the things that they did to convince, so if you are telling me, Mr. Bondholder, me, that you want me to roll over, I'm not taking my 850 today, but roll over for 10 years, right? You have to convince me that you could pay me.
Of course.
Think about it. Think about it on the street.
But Mr. America,
right? If you owe a man in the village $850, and they come and say, boss, give me some more time now, right? The first thing the man will want to know is, can this fella really pay me?
Exactly.
Right? And he may want some better terms and so on. So the closure of the refinery was related to their strategy to convince the bondholders to roll over. Now, there was no need to close the refinery.
But before I'm glad you said that. So that's the question I want to ask. Is it that based on all that you've seen as far as the financials and what have you, did it cost us more to wind it down, to close it down, than it was to run?
I think so. This is why this thing is not going to go away, right? Because people have questions and they're not buying the rationale and explanation given to them by the government, right?
Especially now that we've come through almost 10 years.
People drive up and down that highway every day.
Right.
People drive up and down the Southern Main Road every day, and they see this thing which was an iconic symbol of our industrial strength dropping and decaying. And now we hear about the Nigerian company, and I don't know too much about them, right? I just know what I've been reading and so on, but we're now being told that a Nigerian entity called Oando has been selected from a process, and the government is going to enter into some negotiation with them with the view of leasing the refinery, right? So we'll get to that just now.
Right.
But so there was no need to close the refinery to convince the bondholders to roll over. The losses that Petrotrin were making, that the government makes so much about, were as a result of the debt that was incurred by Petrotrin under the PNM. 2007, they borrowed $750 million US. 2009, they borrowed $850 million US. And those bonds had to be repaid with interest, significant interest. What happened? When you borrow money to build a new plant, that money goes onto your balance sheet as a liability. I come back to your accounts here again.
That's right. That's right.
When the plants that you borrow the money to build are finished and become operational from an accounting point of view, two things happen. One is that the interest associated with the money that was borrowed to build those plants goes onto your profit and loss statement as an expense. The interest is expensed onto the profit and loss statement, right?
Right.
The second thing that happens, that's a big interest charge on your profit and loss statement because the plant is now operational. So the interest associated with the loan it goes onto the profit and loss statement. The second thing that happens is that there was a big jump in the depreciation expense of Petrotrin because as these new plants started to operate, when you drive a new car out of a showroom, what does happen? You have depreciation automatically. In the showroom in Port of Spain, they have a line, they call it the depreciation line.
Yeah, once you cross.
So as the new plant started between 2012, 2013, 2014, because the gasoline optimization program, that $1.6 billion upgrade of the refinery was completed under the government of the People's Partnership, Mrs. Prasad Bissasa's government.
Right.
So when those new plants started operation, the depreciation expense went up, right? And then you had what is called, of course, the expensing of the interest I just talked about. So all those things were hitting the profit and loss statement at the same time, right? That is why, but Petrotrin goes into Parliament in October 2023, and he says the company started to make losses in between 2010 and 2015. It was because the debt that was incurred by Mr. Jones and those previous boards started to flow from the balance sheet into the profit and loss statement. And I recommend a book called Frank Wood to the minister. It's not the first time, a book by a gentleman called Frank Wood, Basic Financial Accounting. It's a textbook that is well known to students of accountancy. Yeah. The other thing that happened, Mikey, is that between 2014 and 2016, oil prices fell sharply. And the refinery, we had no control over that. Nobody has control over that. Okay. The refinery, those tanks that you see in the refinery that you see, some of them from the highway, some of them from the main road, a lot of those tanks have fuel, crude oil, diesel, gasoline. The value of those things fell, right? So, it comes like, if you have a barrel of diesel in your house, right? And the price of diesel was to drop by half tomorrow. The value of what you have in your house has now fallen by half.
Exactly.
Right? Similarly, if you have a barrel of diesel in your house and Mr. Imbud raises the price of diesel in September, well, I hope he would not be around in September to read the budget. But let's say there's an increase, the value of that goes up. Right. So when you are carrying inventory, and the refinery was carrying millions of barrels in inventory, and the price of oil fell, the value of that inventory had to be written down.
So, right, depreciated. Okay.
And that again was reflected. That diminishing of the asset value was reflected on your profit and loss statement. So that too was happening. The other thing that was happening is that there were a lot of impairments. There was the impairment of the GTL plant. Mr. Gillette, when he was chairman of Petrotrin and his board, they had to say, listen, we're going to take a hit on this GTL plant because it was impaired. Right. And that impairment, of course, when you impair an asset, what happens is there's a reflective entry onto your profit and loss statement. Again, so all those things were happening. So between 2010 and 2015, we were paying for the sins.
So
what went before.
Was it a case of trying to get out as best as possible, to maneuver as best as possible out of all of these obligations?
Well, we were there was a lot of good work between 2010 and 2015. And by 2015, the refinery had started to turn around. Okay. Right? And proof of that, I know again, PNM people are listening and they probably say, He don't know what he's talking about.
Yeah.
But the same Lashley report that they commissioned, the same Lashley report has a graph that shows the refining margins that they like to talk about increasing significantly by 2015. So much so that the Mikey, and I just give me a minute here.
Yeah, go ahead.
So between 2012 and 2014, the refinery underwent a series of critical plant turnarounds to address years of neglected maintenance.
Right.
These turnarounds reduced the throughput and lowered refinery margins. So what does that mean? It means that the refinery is accustomed refining about 140,000 barrels of crude oil per day. Its peak capacity is about 165,000 per day. But because we were doing these turnarounds and shutting down plants and so on, and the people from Petrotrin who will listen to this interview will know what we're talking about, the throughput of the refinery fell. But we did not send home anybody.
Oh.
So while the throughput went down, the operational expenditure of the refinery remained the same. So for those years, 2012, 2013, 2014, you have what looks to be what are negative margins.
Okay.
But by 2015 and 2016, refinery margins began improving as demonstrated in the Lashley report at page 12. And I have come to the point where I'm starting to quote page numbers. Right? So, I just want to go back here to you see, Minister Young likes to go back to 2010 to 2015. So if he likes to go back in time, I will go back in time too. So I'm going back, Mikey,
All right.
to the Hansard report of Parliament, October 19th, 2009. And I'm going to read something that a gentleman said in the Parliament. He said, "We will be laughed at, but Petrotrin will bankrupt Trinidad and Tobago." This is 2009, you know, right? Because, the person continues, when it is time to pay that $9 billion, that is the two bonds that were borrowed, right?
Yeah, right.
750 million in 2007, 850 million in 2009. When you convert them into TT dollars, it's about 9 billion. When it is time to pay that 9 billion and Petrotrin cannot pay it, I want to see the day or the year in this country when the government will allow bondholders to take Petrotrin and default on the bond. Hansard, House of Representatives, October 19, 2009. You would be surprised who was the speaker.
Don't tell
The
me.
speaker was none other than the Member of Parliament for Diego Martin West.
No.
That's the man himself, yeah. This was Dr. Rowley's. By this time, I think he may have been at odds with Mr. Manning. This was Dr. Rowley on Petrotrin back then, right?
Okay.
So the PNM, when you look at Petrotrin, you can't look at Petrotrin as 2010 to 2015 or pull out a page from the 2018 financials. You have to look at the entirety of what happened between 2007 and 2018. And I'll come back to this $16.5 billion loss. That is as a result of the closing down of the company, which caused the impairment of plant property and equipment, which caused a big negative number on your profit and loss statement. And those dominoes were put in place by the PNM, by the current government.
And what you're telling us here, what you were able to unearth, was something that we were never told. Again, a lot of information was being said, a lot of documents was being bandied about, look at it. A lot of verbal acrobatics was taking place. But what you have told us there, Mr. Ramnarine, clearly and really truly shows that the administration cannot be trusted when it comes to this issue of dealing with Petrotrin. Now, we've crossed the timeline.
And the thing is, you know, the information is there. It's 111 pages.
That's right.
Why pull one page out and put it up on Facebook? Speak to the entirety of the
because
what
it's
is behind the 16. You know, that comes like, you know what that comes like? That comes like you take your blood sugar and it's high.
Yeah.
And you say, okay, boy, it's high. It's higher. Okay.
But
you're not going behind the number to see all that is behind the number. So behind that $16.5 billion loss, There's a whole story, and I just gave the story.
Yeah.
It is as a result of the closure of the company.
And let me ask you this, because I'm
And
kind of
KPMG was clear as day from page 3 of that report to say that,
Dragon
KPMG was clear that they were not going to be misunderstood.
Okay, so
right? KPMG is not, and KPMG is not no kind of, KPMG is a serious company.
Yeah. Let me
right?
ask you,
KPMG is one of the big accounting firms in the world.
Right. Let me ask you. So we're crossing the timeline here. Dragon deal. Give us an, because I mean, so much.
Well, the actions by President Trump and Marco Rubio in the last week have really been targeted at Chevron.
Yeah.
What they call General License 41. And they have told Chevron that they have 1 month to wind down operations in Venezuela and stop pumping oil, stop selling Venezuelan oil, and so on. The OFAC has said that they will also be considering other licenses as appropriate. Right now, that would definitely mean the license for Dragon and the license for Coquina Mannequin. So at this stage, we don't know where those things are going to land, but we know that the government of the United States was prepared to be very tough on Chevron. And who is Chevron? Chevron is as American as apple pie.
Right.
Right?
But the thing about it too is that when you're dealing with issues like this is something that when you sit in a board meeting and a decision is made, there's a lot of planning, things that take time. Now, Mr. Trump is very unpredictable when it comes to his policies. I mean,
that's his style.
That's his style. That's the thing about it.
That's his style.
I think that's what he uses to perhaps.
I think that's one of his strengths.
Exactly. And so when you look at it, he might say something today with his policy, and then tomorrow he may change his mind. As you can see, he spoke about tariffs. Now he's holding back for 1 month.
What I can tell you, Mikey, is that the Cuban-Venezuelan lobby in the state of Florida is very powerful, and very much they have the air of the Republican Party. As you know, the state of Florida is a heavily leaning towards the Republic. It's a Republican state.
It is.
Right? The 2 senators are Republicans. Rubio is no longer a senator, Rubio and Scott. And President Trump won the seat by about 6 or 7 points. So it's no longer a marginal seat, right? For the Republican Party. It's like a safe seat for them now. So a lot of that success that the Republican Party has had in Florida is because of the Cuban and the Venezuelan communities there. And there are a few Cuban ancestry congressmen and congresswomen and so on in that state that have the ear of the president. So they want to see Nicolas Maduro dealt with, and they believe that the result of the election, July 2024 and so on, is a illegitimate result, and that Mr. Urrutia, Edmundo Gonzalez Urrutia, really won the election and so on. So all these things now are playing against us. And if the government of the United States is prepared to pick up the whip and rest it on Chevron, who is as an American, as I said, apple pie, right? Then we have now to...
Yeah.
We now have a cloud of uncertainty that is even greater over this Dragon project.
Yeah, and with that,
I know we run out of time.
Yeah, I know. But with that uncertainty, then what was told to us for 2027, how concrete is that?
Well, there is no concrete, right? In fact, it might be. I don't know. The concrete might be in liquid state. Yeah. Right? It might be sand, but there is no certainty around Dragon, and this country cannot base its economic future on something that is so uncertain. And the Dragon project, which is going to be a major part of the politics in 2025, the Dragon project, it is irrefutable that the Dragon project was sold to the country by the PNM as, the savior.
That's right.
That is irrefutable that they sold it as the future of our children.
Yeah, our economic life raft.
Another minister said it was, our prosperity and so on. And I'm not against the project at all, because the first thing they will say, they don't want the project to happen, and they're wishing the country bad.
That's not what
well, if it happens, I'm very glad for Trinidad, because we need the gas.
Yeah.
But if it doesn't happen, and if the deep water doesn't happen, right, because they're pushing for the deep water to be approved soon. If those two things don't happen,
then we're going to pay a price.
some serious trouble.
Yeah.
Because the lifeblood of this country is natural gas.
That's right.
It's what pays the bills. It's what gives us.
I don't know what else you want to touch on, but go right ahead and take us.
So those are the I'll just close by saying that the refinery matter, of course, in an election year.
We lost you there. Are you there? Go ahead.
You know how that transaction went down, but to have that going on in an election year, right? That is something which that ought not to be dealt with in an election year. Something of that gravity, an asset of that size, something so important to the country. But here we are in an election year. We talk about refinery being leased and so on. And I'm not casting any aspersions on the bidder, on the Nigerian company, but I'm just saying that in an election, it's a combustive political environment. That should not be something which was happening in an election year. The government should have sought to treat with that 2024, 2023, and so on. But they have dragged with this entire refinery process since 2018. The other thing is that the cost of restarting that refinery is not going to be small money. I had estimated $1 billion back in 2019, right? It could be more than that by now. So the financial strength, whoever is coming into that refinery, has to demonstrate that they have either the deep pockets or they have access to financing.
Yeah.
That could, because you're going to need somewhere in the region of $1 billion to restart that refinery.
That's right.
So we have a lot to talk about. Our energy is central to the political discourse in 2025. The prime ministerial candidate for the PNM for 2025 election is the Minister of Energy. We have the dragon issue, the coquina mannequin issue, the refinery issue. The Petrotrin issue is not going away. Petrotrin issue is going to be around for a long time, right? So the energy sector is certainly in the news. We also have, potential tension between Venezuela and Guyana over, again, the Essequibo, which is, and the oil discoveries and so on. They sent a Coast Guard vessel to harass a Exxon ship.
Yeah.
And that, of course, would catch the eye and the attention of the gentleman in 1600 Pennsylvania Avenue in the United States. You know who lives at that address?
Of course.
The President of the United States, right? So the energy sector is certainly topical in 2025, and whenever you're ready to do another show, I will always be around
I want to thank
give
you.
my view.
I want to thank you so much again. The way you're able to connect the dots. I mean, the way you're able to bring out this information that really and truly gives us this, clear idea of how important energy is going to be in this upcoming general election. And of course, this is what the PNM is going to try to use to get as much traction as possible based on promises. My surprise, however, is what was posted today by the Energy Chamber. I'm a bit surprised. I would think that they wouldn't be in the dark, but the statements that they are making, it seems as though that they know more than us as citizens, and we are also stakeholders in this sector. So we wait and see how this thing unfolds.
Let's see how it unfolds.
Let's see how it unfolds.
And we will have to do more of these.
Definitely. Thank you so much.
Okay,
again.
take care, Mikey.
Thank you so much. Do enjoy the rest of your evening. Have a good one. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Former Energy Minister Kevin Ramnarine connecting the dots first.